Hey there. Welcome to the 7 systems of the emotional brain training. I'm really excited about this video. I've actually been thinking about it and planning it for more than a year now. And so I'm pumped to be able to bring this content to you. So if you've ever wondered, why do people behave the way they do, right? Try to understand human behavior at a deep level. And I really believe that you can't understand people without first understanding emotions and how they work. See, emotion is the single most helpful thing to understand when it comes to understanding humans and their behavior. And this video explains a key piece of the puzzle, our core emotions and how they work. So let me kind of tell you who this is for before we dive in to the video. If you're a coach or a business owner, an entrepreneur, any type of leader, you really need to understand how the brain works at a basic level in order to help people change, right? And it's not just those people who are in leadership positions. I really think every human being would benefit from understanding this material, and they should really teach it in schools because it's kind of just like the fundamentals of how things work. So if you struggle with any type of mindset issue, which in my experience, pretty much everyone either does or has in the past, this framework is vitally important to understand. It's really the key to understanding people deeply, like I said, and more importantly, it's the key to understanding yourself more deeply. So this is I believe, the simplest way to understand the brain from a systems perspective without having to read a bunch of complicated books on neuroscience or research articles or things like that. So this is a bit of a longer video, but I promise it's worth watching until the end. It's packed with all sorts of valuable insights and takeaways, and some really fascinating tidbits about the brain in particular, including, let's get to a few of the things we're going to cover. So you'll discover the 2 driving forces that control virtually all of human behavior. I'm going to talk about the big 3, a simple shortcut for figuring out which feeling is keeping you stuck in any moment. I'm going to talk about, is fear really the number one thing that holds most people back? This is a surprising discovery I made after years of believing the conventional wisdom. And finally, I'll reveal how a famous neuroscientist shows that there are actually 2 types of anxiety, and it's important to know which one you have when you're dealing with it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, of course. Lots more to be talked about and discussed. So before I go any further, I want to give a quick disclaimer that these systems are not my own work. This is based on the work of a famous neuroscientist. His name is Jacques Panksepp, and he's considered by many to be the father of effective neuroscience. More than any other person alive, I believe, he's studied the neuroscience of how emotions are generated in the brain. And this video represents sort of my top takeaways from his book, The Archaeology of Mind. If you really are interested in neuroscience and want a deeper dive on these systems, this is a fantastic book. It's one of my favorite books on neuroscience by far. But I will say it's very dense, right? It took me over a year reading this book and taking lots of notes and checking on the research he was referencing to get through the whole thing. So it's not beach reading. It's really not like a light, easy read, but it's packed full of profound information and lots of different hypotheses based on these systems too that Panksepp has sort of outlined in the book. So if you really want to go deep on the neuroscience behind this, feel free to grab a copy of that. All right, so let's go to the next piece of information. This is the 2 driving forces that control virtually all human behavior. And those are the 2 P's, pain and pleasure. I love this quote from Jeremy Bentham. He says, nature has placed mankind under the governance of 2 sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. And I think those are really the 2 driving forces of all behavior. So generally speaking, we move towards things that feel good and away from things that feel bad, right? Kind of makes sense. By the way, the neuroscience term for pain and pleasure is rewards and punishments. They also use this in behavioral psychology and stuff like that too. So what this means in very simple terms is that if something is rewarding, meaning it feels good when we do it, we'll do more of that behavior and be drawn towards it. And if something is painful or unpleasant, we'll generally avoid doing it. So each of these core emotions, these 7 emotions I'm going to unpack, they feel different, but they sort of fall into those 2 big categories of pain and pleasure, right? This is important, and I'm going to emphasize this throughout the video, that emotions are not neutral, right? They don't feel neutral to us. They either feel good or they feel bad. And these 7 systems, when you break them down, you can kind of think of them as 4 feel good, right? 4 fall under the category of pleasure, and 3 of them feel bad. They fall under the pain category, right? Okay. So before we dive into the systems, need to do some basic work on what are emotions anyways, right? So just a really high level overview. This is Panksepp's definition. He says, emotions are ancient brain processes that make our experiences important to us, not only in terms of survival, but in terms of everyday values. Emotions are a request for action. And this is kind of a fascinating, little nugget, that the deep systems of the cerebellum, which is part of the brain that's implicated in physical movement, that's involved in helping create the physical movements of our body, the cerebellum lights up during brain images of emotional arousal. And one reason this is important is, among many others, is that therapies. I believe that therapies that involve the body, for example, can be effective at shifting our emotional states for this reason. So, anyways, to sum up, emotions, what are they? They drive us into action, they promote our survival, and they act as the rewards and the punishments that determine our behavior. Okay. So I'm going to get into a brief model of the brain before I unpack all the systems. This is Panksepp's 3-part model of the brain. And in basic terms, the lower regions of the brain have what he calls core affects, core emotions, these 7 systems that I'm going to refer to throughout the video. Then in the midbrain, the middle parts of the brain, are the learning mechanisms of the brain. And then in the upper part of the brain, the cortex, is where our cognitions, our conscious thinking takes place. So if you're having thoughts and thinking about things actively in your brain, generally speaking, these upper regions are involved in that, the cortex. So let me show you another quick model that's kind of cool. It's called the hand model of the brain. So if you take your hands and go like this, right? That is the brain in a nutshell. So the emotions, this is the cortex, the upper part. The emotions are generated down in the lower regions, including the midbrain, right here, below this neocortical thinking cap. The learning mechanisms are also kind of take place in the midbrain in particular, and those control virtually every type of learning. Like, there's lots of different types of learning, semantic learning, emotional memory, stuff like that. But I'm not going to get into all that procedural learning. I'm not going to get into all those definitions of learning, but I am going to go kind of deeper on emotional learning, because that's really what's relevant to this video. So, but key thing is that learning takes place without the involvement of the neocortex, these upper regions of our brain, especially emotional learning. So when I'm referring to emotional learning, I'm talking about how these emotional brain systems get activated or sensitized, is in other words, and they learn how to recreate feelings in our life, and they come up, past experiences. That's how the past influences the present in a lot of ways from emotional learning. Okay, cool. So next slide. All right. So as Panksepp explains, the secondary processes of the brain, what he calls the secondary processes, the basic forms of learning, memory, and habit formation, are among the most unconscious mental processes of them all. And once we understand this, then many of the bizarre and faulty views from psychology's past may be rectified. Okay. So this is important. If you're struggling with any kind of limiting belief, it almost always means that one of these systems is activated, and it's due to emotional memory. At some point in your life, one of the systems got activated in response to a difficult or painful experience that you had. So then you learned or internalized a rule about life, a way of seeing the world, a certain perspective. And this learning often happens with no conscious awareness on your part or participation on your part. And that explains why sometimes the things we learn, and this emotional brain learns, they don't make much sense on face value, but they make deep sense to the emotional brain. And I'm going to unpack this emotional brain thing a little bit further because, as you'll see in a second, it's not like one emotional brain. It's a little bit more complicated. But anyways, so this concept of limiting beliefs is something that we dive deep on in our Tools for Transformation program. And we show in detail how to use knowledge of these brain systems and other discovery tools to identify and shift any feeling holding you back in 15 minutes or less. Okay, it's a pretty cool program. But let's get back to the parts of the brain. All right, so I'm going to simplify this three-part model even further and basically explain that there are two key brain systems that you need to be aware of: the rational brain and the emotional brain. And I'll explain how the relationship between these two key brain regions is the key to sort of understanding and unlocking human behavior. So, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to combine the learning mechanisms of the brain and the core emotional systems into one system and just call that lower system the emotional brain. Because both emotions and learning happen at deep subconscious levels. And then everything above these regions, the upper regions of the brain, the cortex, I'm calling the rational brain. So let me define the emotional brain a little bit further. I'm really just referring to the lower level of circuitry below the cortex. And these are multiple systems involved in generating emotions, the subconscious learning mechanisms of the brain, and running our habits. That's the primary thing that I'm referring to when I say emotional brain. Now, I want to be crystal clear on this point because anyone who's studied the brain, I know right now you're going to come at me, and don't come at me because I want to explain this. There is not one region or point in the brain where you can point to and say, look, here's your emotional brain. This little part right here is where your emotions are generated. Right? It doesn't work like that at all. In fact, each emotion is generated by a unique system involving multiple regions of the brain. And however, some of the regions, some of the systems, they rely on the same brain circuitry. So, pieces of the brain you might have heard of, like the amygdala and the PAG, are involved in multiple systems. The PAG actually is probably involved in every single one of these 7 systems too. So I'm not going to unpack the circuitry of each of these systems. For that, I'll refer to you to Panksepp's book if you really want to, understand all the different parts and how they interact with each other. But key point, all of this does take place below the neocortex, right? Below that neocortical thinking gap, and these deep subcortical, meaning below the cortex systems of the brain. Now, the rational brain is obviously a vitally important piece of our humanity. And I'm not going to really go deep on the rational brain and the gifts of that in this video. Suffice to say that, this very developed, specialized part of our brain is what makes us human, and it distinguishes us from other animal species. But this video is not looking at all that stuff, and instead it's just the deep dive on the 7 systems. Okay. So when it comes to the systems of the emotional brain, this is actually something that we have in common with our mammal friends. Things like dogs, cats, and other furry critters, dolphins, whales. They're all mammals. And as mammals, we actually share common circuitry below the cortex. A lot of people don't know this, but Panksepp spent basically his whole career studying the brains of mammals like rats. And he discovered that our brains below the cortex are remarkably similar to other animals. Okay. So what I'm calling the emotional brain is not different. These 7 distinct systems can be found in every mammal species. And I think these systems are what links us with other mammals. And I think they explain why we can develop such strong relationships with our pets, right? Because we have a common set of core emotions that sort of bind us together. And as an example, if you look at a puppy, you'll see every one of these 7 systems activated at some point in their lives. And you could even see them all, within one action-packed day. But one difference is that, as humans, we can sort of mask or inhibit our emotions better. We can hide them using the rational brain. But most animals, they don't have that ability. When a dog is angry, you know that the dog is angry, right? It's growling. When a person is angry, though, you don't always know it. Sometimes we're pretty good at hiding our emotions because we have those rational brain capacities, right? Okay. So another quick point. There are other theories of emotion that are out there in the world. And the two most common are readout theories of emotion and constructivist theories. I'm personally not a big fan of those other theories of emotion. I think they're deeply flawed and they lead to some truly crazy conclusions. You know, if you want to get into an argument about the science about that, feel free to send me a message with your passionate thoughts. I'm not going to go in depth to explain those two other theories. Suffice to say that I believe this, generally speaking, at least in a big picture sense, is the valid model of emotion. And the reason for that is because it's exhaustively chronicled in his book using lots of references to cross-reference things. He gives abundant evidence to back up his claims. And he uses what he calls the triangulation method, which is directly stimulating the regions of the mammalian brain to see what happens to these subcortical regions, and then studying their instinctual behaviors of these mammals. He also uses, research using PET scans of the brain, PET scans of the brain, and also some, fascinating case reports. So Panksepp, goes into these other theories of emotion, but he kind of explains why neuroscientifically they don't really make much sense, right? That there's a lot more evidence to support his versus the other one. So I'm fully on Team Panksepp for this. But anyways, the takeaway I want you to have from this section is that the brains of all mammals, including humans, are very similar. And the way I see it is that we are fundamentally, emotionally speaking, we're mammals who also happen to have a highly developed cortex. So that makes our emotional world a little bit more complex, but at the root, at the core of it all, we share a lot in common with other mammals when it comes to emotions. So, all right, one final thing that I want to explain before I explain each of the 7 brain systems. This is kind of the basic relationship between the rational brain and the emotional brain, okay? So there's a seesaw effect between your rational brain and your emotional brain. When the emotional brain is more active, when the rational brain is more active, the emotional brain is less active. And when the emotional brain is more active, the rational brain is less active. That might be a little bit confusing. So let me put it in very simple terms. The simplest way to put this is that thinking and feeling don't really go hand in hand. It's usually one or the other. They're sort of inversely correlated. So brain scans show that when someone is emotionally aroused, the blood flows to lower regions of the brain, the emotional brain, what I'm calling it, and away from the upper regions of the brain. So the thinking brain sort of goes offline temporarily. And this makes sense in terms of evolution, that if a big tiger is chasing you and you have your fear system activated, you don't need to be using all your cognitive capacities like long-term planning, goal setting, and thinking in that moment. It doesn't make sense, right? Instead, the lower survival regions of the brain kick in and activate through your body to get you the heck out of there, or to fight the threat or whatever it is. So this is important though, because the rational brain is responsible for things like impulse control, goal setting, conscious thinking. And all of this sort of goes offline, or at least gets degraded when you're under strong emotions, and in particular, strong negative emotions, okay? So this explains something that's a key fact of the brain, something that I find fascinating, which is, why do smart people sometimes do really stupid things? Have you ever wondered that? And this is a key brain fact that explains why even sometimes brilliant people can do some really stupid stuff, right? And sabotage themselves. Some psychologists and brain scientists call this the hijacking effect of emotion. So strong emotions, especially strong negative emotions, like I said, they hijack parts of the rational brain that you need for clear thinking, which explains why smart people do stupid, impulsive things sometimes. The part of the reason for that is that the regions of their brain responsible for clear thinking, impulse control, are sort of offline. So they're temporarily a little bit dumber in that moment, if that makes sense. Okay. So now, of course, the seesaw effect, the reverse is also true. So when you have greater levels of thinking, you have less feeling. And in fact, brain scans show that when you're doing something that requires a lot of conscious thinking and focus, that blood flows to the upper regions of the brain and away from those lower emotional regions, meaning those emotional centers are less activated and your rational brain is more in control. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. But this is important for a lot of reasons, primarily because productivity is really about having your rational brain in control. When you're feeling at ease and sort of knocking through your to-do lists, that's when that part of your brain is in charge, sort of keeping you on track. And when you're stressed, when you're afraid, when you're angry, or even hijacked by positive emotions, which that can happen too, your ability to focus and be productive is going to suffer. So, if you've ever tried to work, be doing work, but something happens to activate one of these systems, let's say, you're planning to be productive, but you get on Facebook and you see something that makes you angry, right? Well, have you ever tried to work after you've gotten really angry like that? It's really difficult to do. It's because the conscious thinking parts of your brain are turned off and sort of the threat detectors are on and your anger is in full force. So, key point is that strong emotions and rational thinking don't go together. It's one or the other. Okay. So I'm about to get to the 7 systems now that we've kind of done some of that foundational work to understand and put this all in context. So from now on, we're going to forget about the rational brain. There's a whole lot more I could say about it. But the rest of this video is just going to be a deep dive on these 7 systems of the brain, the emotional brain. All right. So the way I think about these systems is that they're kind of like the primary colors of emotion. Okay. What do I mean by that? That just like with the primary colors, you have, sort of 3 basic colors, and you can combine those colors in a bunch of different ways to create different colors, to create different shades and different intensities of those colors. So it's the same basic idea here with your emotions. There are only 7 basic systems, or at least there might be some more that they discover down the road, but there are at least 7 systems. And as Panksepp says, anytime you're feeling an emotion, one of these systems is activated. So the labels that we use to describe these different emotional states may be different, but the way they feel is similar. Okay. And I'll give you a couple examples to drive this point home. So for example, sadness and shame are different emotions, different labels, but they feel similar in our brains and in our bodies because they both rely on what I call the sadness social pain system of the brain. They both rely on the same system to generate those 2 different emotions, right? That makes sense. Likewise, frustration and rage are different degrees of emotion, different intensities of emotion, but they both rely on the anger system of the brain. So even if they have a different label, they still rely on activation of one of these 7 core systems. And it's kind of a simplified way of looking at emotion. And that's why I really like this. Now, humans can and do have more complex emotional worlds than animals, than mammals. Most mammals probably don't feel shame, for example. That's more of a human emotion. And that's where you can get into the interaction of our rational brain and emotional brain can kind of create these unique sort of human-based emotions. But like, courage, shame, hope. But all those emotions still rely on these ancient 7 systems to generate them. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. And this is important because when you're doing the actual work of shifting emotions and limiting beliefs, it's really important that you accurately identify the correct feeling or belief behind it. So knowing the full range of possibilities is important. And as I go through each system, I'm going to explain some variations in the names and labels that we give all these feelings. And if you want a list of all the variations of emotions, all the different labels we give them, that's actually created a list that we're giving away to our clients and people in Tools for Transformation program. So they can use it to just really quickly pinpoint the exact feeling holding you back. You can look at the list and say, okay, it's in the sadness social pain system. I'm feeling shame now, or I'm feeling sadness, or whatever it is. So kind of cool. Another real quick point, and then I'm going to get into the systems, I promise, is that more than one of these systems can be aroused or activated at the same time. but some of them inhibit the others. Some of them sort of turn off the other systems. For example, if you're feeling really strong sadness, your play system probably won't be activated. So sadness inhibits play. Some of these inhibit the other ones. Grief inhibits care. And you know this intuitively, right? Like if you're in a really bad mood, it can be hard to access those positive feel-good states of emotion too, right? That's because they sort of inhibit each other. All right. So without further ado, let's get into the 4 positive or feel-good systems of the brain. Okay. So I'm going to unpack each of these and explain why they're important. But a quick note on these positive systems. These all do feel good, meaning they're all effectively rewarding, but they don't always have positive effects on our behavior. So for example, some of these systems are involved in addictions and keeping those addictions going. In particular, the seeking excitement system of the brain. All right, but let me just tell you the 4, and then we'll unpack each one and explain why they're important. So seeking excitement system, the care system of the brain, the lust system, and those are the big 4 positive systems. So let's go into the seeking system next, because this is very important. This is probably the most important system for forward progress, for pleasure, moving towards things. As Panksepp calls it, the granddaddy of all the emotional systems. He says that this system has energized all human creativity. It's been a mental engineer for all civilizations. So, interesting fact, if you've ever heard the term the reward system of the brain, they're usually referring to this system. But it's a bit of a misnomer. See, the old thinking is that, this is the reward center, but it's not quite accurate because all of the 4 feel-good systems of the brain are rewarding. They're effectively rewarding. So just to call this one system the reward system is a bit misleading. There's something that we've developed called the linking feelings strategy that I'm going to unpack in a second. And that's a really powerful way of creating a new behavior that sticks. It's something we teach in our Tools for Transformation program. Okay. So for each of these emotions, I'm going to explain what they feel like too. So this system feels like excitement, eager anticipation. Other labels or names we might give it are curiosity, eagerness, motivation, anticipation. The primary neurotransmitter for this one is dopamine. Dopamine is one of the most important neurotransmitters in the brain, especially related to motivation, that excitement-seeking system. So what happens when the seeking system is under-aroused? That can cause depression, actually, lack of motivation. So some people with depression have underactivation of this system, of the seeking system of the brain, low dopamine levels, right? And over-arousal can lead to excessive cravings and desires. This is even involved in schizophrenia in this part of the brain, mania, and other psychotic delusions. But for people who don't have mental illness, it's involved in distractions on social media. So any type of addiction that anybody has, whether it's internet, gambling, sexual, the seeking system of the brain is going to be involved in that. And social media companies, as an aside, they know how to get people's seeking system hooked, right? And so you're constantly, looking for that next hit of dopamine, right? And among some of the other systems too. This is a really interesting fact about the seeking system, that drugs like cocaine and amphetamines, one reason they're so addictive is because they directly enhance the effects of dopamine and thereby arouse the seeking urge of the brain. So these illegal drugs are actually tapping into the seeking system, the excitement system of the brain, and chemically altering it and really enhancing the effects of it. All right, let's get into the care system of the brain, the next one. This system is based on the evolutionary instinct of maternal love, and it's a very strong urge. Without this system, taking care of young would be a burden. But this system is involved in all sorts of friendships and positive social relationships. It's not just related to mothers. Think of soldiers on a battlefield who care for each other deeply, right? Another interesting fact is that this system is probably involved in confidence. Oxytocin is one of the molecules that neurotransmitters that runs this system, and probably has an effect on confidence levels. I love this quote from Panksepp. He says that care is the great gift of Mother Nature that helps promote lifetime resilience, and it increases the likelihood of lifelong happiness. Without care, humans cannot thrive interpersonally. Okay, so let's get into what care feels like. It feels like non-romantic love, friendship, familial love. Other names and labels we give it include, love, empathy, compassion, and the primary neurotransmitters of this are endogenous opioids and oxytocin. Endogenous means naturally produced by the brain. So the brain produces opioids and that's one of the reasons why opiate drugs are so popular, as I'll explain in a second. All right. When this system is under aroused, it can lead to sadness, to depression. These two conditions tend to be accompanied by low level of brain opioids. Also, people who are sociopathic or psychopathic have those tendencies. They may thrive when this system is underactivated or deficient. So like I said, drugs of abuse, things like morphine and heroin, they're chemically similar to the endogenous, meaning naturally produced brain chemicals. And that's why taking them feels so good, right? It feels like you're activating the care system of the brain. This system does inhibit the sadness social pain system, and it explains why things like giving hugs, connecting with friends and loved ones can, make our sadness better. This system is vitally important in the care of children, and if parents don't show enough attuned care for their kids, that can lead to lifelong developmental problems. It can lead to an overactivation of what I call the sadness social pain system. So those two are sort of inversely correlated. All right, let's get into the next one, which is play. So the play system is defined by the urge to engage creatively and joyously in the mental world of others, to establish friendships, and to learn through eager, friendly competition. Play is best defined by laughter, which is one of nature's finest emotional gifts. As children, it tends to show up as rough and tumble play, kind of tackling each other, playing around, a very physical aspect of play. And this type of rough and tumble play is actually crucial for the development of social skills and for the development of the children's brains. As adults, play tends to show up as, humor, verbal interchange, friendly teasing, stuff like that. All right, let's talk about how play feels. Play, the representation of it, like laughter, it feels joyous. And in fact, some other names and labels we give to this system are humor. Joy probably actually comes from this system. Mischief, right? Someone who's mischievous has an activated play system. This one's interesting because the neurochemistry is a little bit undefined. At least it was back when Panksepp published his book, I think in around 2011, 2012 range. So they're not exactly sure what neurochemistry drives play, but they do know that it is one of the systems. All right. When play is under-aroused, this is a really interesting fact that if you struggle with ADHD, then you might not have gotten enough activation of the play system as a kid. There's evidence that parents who don't let their children do rough and tumble play, that some of those kids go on to develop ADHD in their lives. So like I said, it's a vitally important emotion for social and physical development of children. Over-arousal of the play system can lead to rambunctiousness, especially in children, inappropriate comments or humor in adults. And this is interesting. Panksepp says that the play urge is both robust and fragile, which means when you're feeling safe and calm, play sort of emerges naturally. But all of the big three negative emotional states do reduce the urge to play. All right. Let's get to the next system, which is lust. It's one I'm not going to go super in depth on for, pretty self-explanatory. This emotion or feeling is very important for the survival of the species, and it's also very effectively rewarding. As you know, anyone who's an adult who's had intercourse with someone else knows it's very positive feeling. This feeling of lust is involved in sexual attraction. I'm not going to go into this one in depth. It's pretty self-explanatory. Lust feels like sexual desire, other names for it, horniness, obviously. Primary neurotransmitters are prolactin, dopamine is also involved in this system too. And when the lust system is over-aroused, it can lead to bad decision-making. In fact, this one system, I believe, is responsible for ruining the careers of lots of famous politicians, actors, and business leaders. If you think of someone like, Anthony Weiner, who was sexting people, pictures of, lustful pictures of his body. And he's, on face value, seems to be a pretty smart guy. Like, why would he do something like that and ruin his career? Well, he was for sure hijacked by the lust system of his brain. Remember the hijacking effect of emotions. And, he allowed that to control his behavior instead of the more appropriate systems, we'll say. All right. So I'm not going to, as you can see, from a behavioral perspective, lust is important to understand, but it's less important, from a behavioral perspective for lots of reasons. Okay, cool. So that's the positive four, the four positive feel-good emotions. Seeking excitement system. Panksepp just calls it the seeking system, but I added the excitement label because that's kind of what it feels like when it's activated. The care system of the brain, play, and lust. I want to leave you some real quick thoughts on how to use this info on these four systems. And as a reminder, they all feel good, right? But sometimes their effects, when they're activated, are not always positive in a big picture sense, right? So it's possible that one of these four feel-good systems might be sabotaging you in some way, especially the seeking excitement system. For example, social media companies, they know how to get people addicted to their platforms by tapping into these systems. And their goal is to keep you on their platform and to hold your attention for as long as possible. So I wouldn't call that necessarily a positive thing because, it's not super productive to be playing on social media, and especially when you have other better things to do, right? But the reason we do it is because it taps into these feel-good systems of our brain. And social media companies have deliberately engineered their product to be as addictive and attention-getting as possible. They know about these systems, right? They have people who work on, who do research, who advise them on how to do this better. So, but it's not all negative, of course. You can use these systems also to engineer positive behaviors. I mentioned earlier an advanced technique called the linking feeling strategy, which I think is the quickest and easiest way to create a new behavior that sticks. This is something we teach in depth in our Tools for Transformation program, but you can use it to overcome issues like procrastination, self-sabotage, if you're avoiding certain key things in your business. So any new behavior that you should be doing but you aren't doing, you can use the linking feeling strategies to create that behavior. For example, I've worked with a lot of business owners and things like doing content marketing for their business, or maybe doing sales and prospecting activities, something that they avoid doing when they know they should. So in that case, let me explain the strategy at a sort of high level. The first step is to identify and clear any negative feelings you have about the task that are holding you back from doing it. This involves the big three bad feelings, negative feelings that I'm about to explain. So for example, with sales, it might be, you might have a fear of rejection or a fear of failure, anything like that might be keeping you from doing it. First, you delete at the root those fears, those negative beliefs around it, any kind of pain that your brain is linked to the task. And you can do that using a tool like EFT or the erase and replace technique, which is something that we unpack pretty deep in our program and show you how to use. But with that tool, you can shift really any feeling or belief within 15 minutes or less, right? Once you know how to use it. So step two, once you've done that, once you cleared all the painful, negative, aversive feelings around the task, then you can actually link positive feelings. That's where the name comes from, the linking feeling strategy. And any of the three out of the four that are socially appropriate. Obviously, not the lust system, right? You're not going to link the lust system in the brain to doing sales activity. That would be crazy. But especially the seeking excitement system of the brain, if you can feel excited about doing that task, whereas previously you felt afraid of doing it for some reason or avoidance of it, then it's really likely that you'll do it, right? And do it consistently because it's a rewarding task for you, right? So you can primarily tap into the seeking excitement system, but you can also do it using the play and the care system. And so, we've developed a whole protocol around that, how to do this linking feeling strategy inside of our Tools for Transformation program. If you want to check that out, it's a really powerful strategy for creating new behaviors, because really how you feel about something is more than anything going to determine whether you do it or not. All right, cool. So let's switch over to the negative systems, what I call the big three feel bad negative systems of the brain. And this is really a simple shortcut for figuring out, which emotion is holding you back in your life. It explains a lot more than just that too, though. So, you can use this as a sort of shortcut to figure out what's holding you back so that you can clear it using tools like EFT, like I mentioned. And I'm going to also explain how I use this system to diagnose and shift a business owner's mindset problem in less than 15 minutes, right? Really pretty powerful. Okay, so before I get into the systems, here's a key point. Anytime you're dealing with a limiting belief, and what I mean by limiting belief is just some kind of belief or feeling that keeps you from getting what you want, right? Anytime you got something like that going on, one of these three systems is activated. And it's the emotions that are attached to the belief is what makes them difficult to change, okay? And it's what makes it so influential in our behavior. So, for example, I recently helped a lady who was struggling to post content, about her business post sales posts because of a deep-seated, limiting belief about herself. So, why would someone find it difficult, to promote themselves? Well, in her case, because of the negative emotion that it brought up whenever she thought about doing it, she had an activated sadness social pain system, which is one of the big three, which it was based around a belief that there was something really wrong with her, and that potential clients, when she posted about her business, would see right through her and see that negative truth about her. So I had to help her clear that belief so she could feel differently about it and feel free and easy about posting about her business. Okay, so as a reminder, emotions are not, they're not neutral systems. They either feel good or they feel bad. And the big three all feel bad. They're unpleasant when they get activated. Now, I know some coaches out there say things like, well, emotions aren't good or bad, just allow yourself to feel them. And that advice does come from a good place, I think, but it's a little gaslighting. I don't really like when people say that. But I just want to be clear on this, that negative emotions are not bad. They serve a very useful, important purpose for humanity and for everything. But they do feel bad when they get activated. And that's why people tend to avoid these emotions. One reason that we know why these systems are aversive, meaning unpleasant, is because both animals and humans don't like experiencing them. If you electrically stimulate one of these systems in rats, for example, and you do it in a particular part of the cage where they're in, they will avoid going to that area of their cage afterwards, because they have a negative association to it. It likely means that they didn't like the feeling. They don't want to experience that again, right? And no amount of telling the rat, just feel your anger, just feel your sadness, is going to make it better for them, right? It's not pleasant. So, just to be clear, allowing yourself to feel these emotions is very valuable when they come up, right? It's part of being human, and these emotions all signal specific needs, that need to be met, desires for action. But getting one of these systems overstimulated for a long period of time or hyper aroused is not a good thing. Okay, it can lead to a lot of problems and all sorts of issues. In fact, Panksepp suggests, and I think it makes a lot of sense, that this is likely what's happening in cases of mental illness, or at least it's one piece of the equation. One of these systems is getting overactivated and sort of breaking through into people's lives, right? Okay, so let me get into the big three and explain each one. All right, so these are the big three, and this is the real cause of most mindset blocks that hold people back. An implicit belief paired with one of these three emotional brain systems. So I'm going to explain each one, then tell you how you can use this knowledge practically to help your life. So they are anger, fear, and the sadness social pain system. All right, so let me unpack anger first. This one is obviously a very important emotion. Panksepp calls it the rage system of the brain. Basically the same thing, anger or rage. And anger happens because of an encroachment of some sort. This emotion is not designed to punish, but to bring other people in line with your desires. And this is his definition of anger, Panksepp. An emotional state that involves both an attribution of blame for some perceived wrong and an impulse to correct the wrong or prevent its recurrence. So some key points about the anger system are that people and animals can also feel angry if the aspirations of the seeking system are thwarted, such as by the sudden withdrawal of anticipated rewards. So what he means by this is, for example, if you have a dog and you gave that dog a treat, and then you tried to take that treat away from the dog, it would get angry, right? You'd hear it growl or bark or something like that. It doesn't like that. And a human example is, if you don't get something that you want, let's say you fail to reach a goal, that might make you angry, right? That might activate the anger system, the aspirations of the seeking system. Your desires were thwarted, so it triggers anger. So anger is usually directed at others, but it can be directed inward at yourself. It could be directed at situations or circumstances. And as Panksepp says, anger is a fundamentally unpleasant emotion. Chronically angry people are troubled and unhappy. We all know someone who's chronically angry. That person is really pretty miserable. All right, so here's what anger feels like. Well, pretty self-explanatory. It feels like anger, rage. It can lead to tension in the body, muscles tightening up to fight. Other names and labels for it are frustration, irritation, being annoyed, pissed off, rage, hatred. Those are pretty strong degrees of anger, obviously. The primary neurotransmitters for this feeling are testosterone, substance P, and norepinephrine. And let's see, what does overarousal of the system lead to? Chronic irritability. Someone who's always pissed off is a good example of that. Childhood maltreatment and neglect can lead to anger that lasts a lifetime. This is an interesting note about gender differences too in aggression. They are due in part due to testosterone. It's obviously not the only thing that causes differences in aggression between males and females, but the research shows that when females are infused with testosterone, they do become more aggressive and less tolerant of others, just like men, which suggests that there's a biological basis for higher levels of male aggression and violence, right? At least it's a part of the equation. Okay. So anger, that one's pretty self-explanatory. Everyone has felt angry before, obviously, in their lives. This next one's obviously a common emotion too, fear. So this system was really designed to counter predation as a way of avoiding getting eaten or killed by a predator. And it's typically activated as a defense against injury and death. But fear can also get activated by anticipation of future events that are painful in the future, right? That can generate a fearful response too. So you're dreading something that might be a painful experience in the future. Also, the fear system can get generalized or linked with other threats. And to kind of explain that, this is a really great quote by Panksepp about the fear system. In the brain not and could not inform us of all the things we might fear and avoid. intelligent, we humans can learn to fear more things, past and present, than a little mouse can. In multiple senses, we humans are the most fearful creatures on the face of the earth. We can create fears for ourselves beyond the imagination of any other species. That's a really great quote. All right, the fear system, what does it feel like? Well, sympathetic arousal of the nervous system, that fight or flees response. The fight response is probably due to the anger system, like I suggested. So when people say fight or flight, they're really talking about two different systems. Fear is always accompanied by an aroused autonomic nervous system. And I'm going to explain why that's important in a second when I get to the sadness social pain system and talk about the distinction between these two. So some other labels and names we give fear, worry, anxiety, that's fear-based anxiety. I'm going to explain the two types of anxiety in a second. Terror, obviously an extreme form of fear. And the primary neurotransmitter for this system is CRF, corticotrophin releasing factor. All right, so what happens when fear gets over aroused in the body can lead to brain and body can lead to specific phobias, anxiety disorders, especially the fear-based anxiety. Fear is always, accompanied with PTSD. And this is a really interesting thing, but a lot of people believe that fear is the number one thing that holds people back. And I want to actually question that in a second and explain as we get to the second system. The third system, sadness social pain system. All right. This one is a really fascinating system. Panksepp calls it the panic grief system. And the reason for that is there's strong evidence that this system is involved in creating panic attacks. But I prefer the term sadness and social pain because it's a slightly more, human-friendly name for it. This system gets activated due to loss, loss of a loved one, grief, and by a breakdown in human relationships. It's also linked with concepts like failure, self-worth, self-doubt. All those things activate the sadness social pain system in the brain. So this term, social pain, is a really key term, and that's why I've included it in the label, because the brain regions that control the perception of physical pain are also involved in this system too. The evidence for that is that opiate drugs can produce feelings of physical pain and emotional and psychic pain as well. So what this means is that the experience of social pain is similar to the experience of physical pain in the brain and the body. And it explains why, these breakdowns in social relationships, when we get abandoned, when we get rejected, bullying, loss, that kind of thing, they can feel so almost physically painful. And it's because the brain regions are for physical pain and social pain are very similar, right? They use some of the same regions of the brain to mediate both of those feelings. As Panksepp says, we respond intensely to uncaring emotional gestures directed towards us. Anything that hints at shunning or even milder forms of social exclusion is experienced as psychologically painful. All right. So that's why I included the pain word, social pain word, in the system too. So what does this system feel like? It feels like parasympathetic arousal of the nervous system. So stuff like sadness and crying, it feels like psychic pain. This is different than the fear system because it doesn't activate the body in the same way. And in a second, I'll explain that more in depth. So some other labels for this system are grief, anxiety, social-based anxiety, which is the other type of anxiety, insecurity, shame. So any negative beliefs about yourself, like I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy of love, that's going to activate the sadness social pain system. Worthlessness, that's another big one. This one also relies on CRF as the primary neurotransmitter, at least one of them. And over-arousal of the system can lead to depression, deep sadness, feelings of worthlessness. So let's get into this idea that fear is the number one thing that holds most people back. I really don't think that's true, and here's why. Let me explain my thinking on this. Most limiting beliefs about ourselves in particular activate the sadness social pain system, like I've talked about. And in my work, as a mindset coach, working on, both on myself and working with others for around 15 years now, in my experience, fear isn't the system that gets activated and is behind most mindset problems. Okay. It is still a very important system to understand, and it can be activated and it can be a mindset problem for sure. But I believe that the sadness social pain system is the most common system that holds people back. Now, this is not based on hard research. I want to give that disclaimer. It's based on my observations of doing this work with people and with myself, right? Like I said. So any kind of like negative belief about yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm unworthy of love, there's something wrong with me, any of those things that we internalize about ourselves is going to act social pain system of the brain. And in my experience, most people have experienced breakdowns in their social relationships that cause their limiting beliefs, more so than true experiences that would cause the fear system to get activated, meaning like life or death threats to themselves or severe childhood abuse, will for sure activate the fear system, but also probably the sadness social pain system too. So I just wanted to kind of get out there. I know it's a little bit unconventional way of looking at things, but I do believe that firmly, that sadness social pain is a more common emotional response that holds us back. All right, let's get back to the slides though. Something interesting about this system is that it does gradually become less sensitive as we age, especially in males. Increases in testosterone actually reduce the urge to cry. So this idea that, big boys don't cry is not just like a cultural thing. Boys are less likely to cry once they hit puberty because their gonads, secrete massive amounts of testosterone, and that can inhibit the effects of sadness, right? Another interesting fact is that people who, are under the influence of opiate drugs, heroin, stuff like that, they're comforted because this system is like that, less activated in that moment. And they're probably self-medicating because of these chronic feelings of psychic pain, right? That's why they turn to drugs in the first place, to help reduce those really negative feelings. All right, so let's get into the sadness and fear sort of distinction from a body perspective, like what happens inside of the body. These two activate different arms of the autonomic nervous system, and that's why it's kind of important to make this distinction. So fear and sadness feel very different in the body. Fear activates the sympathetic nervous system. So that system is involved in getting, the person or the animal's body ready for an active response, right? So that flight, or that flight or freeze response activates the body. And does that via something called the HPA axis in the brain. So what that does is when fear gets activated, it increases your heart rate, increases your respiration, your breathing, your breath rate, sweating. It can cause muscle tension. It dilates your pupils. These are all physical responses that fear activates that get the body ready to respond to a physical threat, right? A threat to survival. So it's the sympathetic nervous system activation. Sadness social pain activates sort of the opposite system, which is the parasympathetic response. And what that does is slows the heart rate down. Breathing stays regular usually, unless you're having a panic attack. It can promote things like tears and crying. Usually these feelings are, accompanied by, as Panksepp calls it, weakness and depressive lassitude. So you might have a feeling of tightness in your chest or a lump in your throat. It's not going to activate that full-on active, body response that fear does too. They're very different responses in the brain. So this gets us to this idea of there being two different types of anxiety. As Panksepp says, there are two distinct anxiety type systems in the brain, fear and grief, what I call sadness social pain. And they both promote negative feelings. If we do not distinguish between these two anxiety promoting systems, we may succumb to many errors in thinking and therapeutics. So for example, Social anxiety is probably caused by the sadness social pain system, whereas fear-based anxiety is caused by the fear system. So let me give you a quick rule of thumb that I think is helpful way of thinking about it for determining which type of anxiety you might deal with. The big question is, what are you afraid will happen, right? What's causing the anxiety? If the anxiety is caused by a fear of injury, physical harm, death, things like that, for sure, the fear system is involved. I spoke with someone recently. I can share this story, who had a rageaholic for a father, and he would rage at them when they were growing up, and these huge fits of rage, and scream at them, and tear them down. That's an incredibly fearful experience for a child, for anybody really, but especially a child. So that's for sure going to activate this fear system in the brain, make them feel like I'm not safe, right? What if he hurts me? But if the anxiety is caused by, breakdown in social relationships, so things like the fear of loss, fear of rejection, someone maybe bullied you in the past. Bullying can cause fear too, but, or like a negative belief about yourself, that's really more the sadness social pain system. Okay, so that's that different type of anxiety than the traditional fear-based anxiety. All right, so that's the big three in a nutshell. The three core emotions that feel bad, they are anger, fear, sadness, social pain. And this is kind of a cool story that as soon after I finished reading the book, Archaeology of Mind, I was doing some research online, and I found a therapist who was talking about his experiences. And he said, it's really sadness, fear, and anger. Those are the three things that I look for in my clients. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I asked him, I said, do you know Panksepp? And he said, no, I don't know who that is. He had no idea who Panksepp was, or these emotional brain systems. But he said, it's based on my 30 plus years of experience working with clients. So this is an observation that I had. And I thought that was really cool that, without even reading his work, he had sort of independently come to that same conclusion about the importance of these three systems. So I want to finish this video with some ideas on the big three and, how to use them practically in your own life. First of all, just understanding your core emotions can be very therapeutic too. It can be really helpful to understand that as human beings, we have this, common emotions circuitry that can get, activated or sensitized based on our life experience. So if you're someone who deals with lots of shame or sadness, it's because when you were younger, the system got activated in a big way, and it can get re-triggered, reactivated over time, and cause problems in your life. But just even knowing about these systems can be really helpful for someone. But more importantly, the big three is a shortcut for figuring out what's holding you back. It can really help you, diagnose beliefs and feelings that it's keeping someone stuck. It's really critical for being able to do that. So when I'm coaching somebody, for example, I am looking for one of these three categories of emotion when I'm looking for the beliefs and feelings that might be holding them back. For example, I was helping a business owner shift a feeling related to her team members not performing well. And she gave me a little detail about, what was happening for a few minutes. And I thought, this doesn't sound like the fear system to me. And it also doesn't really sound like sadness, social pain. I was like, this sounds more like the anger system. And the specific emotion that we identified together was frustration, right? So she was frustrated because her team members, weren't performing up to their optimal levels. And, that was frustrating. She went right to that emotion, frustration, and used EFT on it, which is one of the tools that we teach in Tools for Transformation program, and it was gone. Right? The whole thing, the whole conversation and the shifting was like 15 minutes. And she reported back afterwards that she felt so free after that, and she grew her business by 45% the next month because she was no longer dealing with that anger system, right? The frustration. So I'm always thinking, when I'm working with someone, which category of emotion does this fit into? One of those big three, if there's something that is holding them back. From there, I could work to pinpoint the specific emotion behind it based on these systems. So hopefully you find that helpful as a shorthand. In my experience, like I said, I think the sadness social pain system tends to be the one that shows up the most as far as holding people back. But fear and anger are both very, very important systems as well, too, and they can cause all sorts of problems when they're overactivated. So, cool. Hope you found that helpful. And like I said, the reason this is all important is because a technique like EFT or any other transformation-based tool that shifts feelings at the root level, it's really important that you accurately identify the feelings and the beliefs that are causing the emotional state. So Big Three is a pretty helpful shortcut for doing that. All right. So if you found this content valuable, you may want to learn more about our Tools for Transformation program. I've hinted at it a couple times. In this program, we teach you a 4-step process that our company developed called the FREE method, FREE method. It's called that because each letter is an acronym for one of the steps. And this method helps you rapidly identify and shift any feelings holding you back. In it, we go deeper on the Big Three. We teach you how to use the Big Three to pinpoint your feelings that are keeping you stuck. We give you a list of all the emotions and the variations of it, so you can just really check that list and say, oh yeah, I'm feeling this, right? I'm feeling shame, I'm feeling frustration, I'm feeling what's fear? I'm feeling fear, right? So we also teach a bunch of simple techniques in that program for identifying emotions and beliefs holding you back. And the reason for that is because a lot of these beliefs and the feelings are very, very subconscious, and they can be hard to pinpoint on your, and we also give, of course, training on our favorite tool for deleting negative beliefs at the root level, EFT, or the erase and replace technique. We teach you how to use it so you become a master of shifting feelings and believe it very fast. And that's really the beauty of this program is, we teach you how to become your own mindset coach, really. It gives you the power over your own mindset once you have these tools, so you don't have to depend on me or really any other mindset coach each time you discover a problem that you need to shift, right? You have the confidence and the skill set to be able to shift your own stuff. I think that's worth its weight in gold. It's so powerful. I can't even articulate how helpful this knowledge and these tools have been. And your coach working with clients, you can use these tools and the knowledge that we teach in the program to help your clients transform their limiting beliefs too. We've had people go through our program and apply it to their own clients with incredible results as well. So right now we're offering free breakthrough sessions where you can speak to either me or someone else from our company. And in that session, you can learn more about this program or any of the other training programs that we offer. And we take a very value-based approach to these breakthrough sessions too. We want to deliver value in advance as much as possible. So you can find the link to sign up for one of those if you're interested in that right below this video. And I hope that you've found this helpful. I hope it's been a helpful framework for you to understand your own emotions and the emotions of other people. And that's really what it's all about. So, all right, I'm going to sign off and let me know if you have any questions about any of this.